My name is Linda Parker, and I am 52 years old. I have a confession to make, one that sits heavy on my chest every morning and keeps me awake every night. I gave everything I had to my children, every ounce of strength, every dollar, every hope. And that sacrifice, the very thing I thought would save us, ended up breaking our family apart. People like to talk about motherhood as though it's a crown you wear with pride. They see the smiles in school photographs, the packed lunches, the freshly laundered shirts, and they think, what a good mother she must be. But what they never see are the years when you put away your own dreams, the nights when you sit at the kitchen table with unpaid bills and cold coffee, whispering to yourself that somehow it will be enough. For 30 years, that was my life. A quiet house in the suburbs, beige siding, a maple tree in the front yard that my husband, Mark, planted the week we moved in. 2 children, Ethan, born strong and restless, always reaching for more, and Chloe, 4 years younger, soft-spoken, but with a mind that could slice through any problem. To the neighbors, we looked ordinary. To myself, I told the same story. We were a normal family, blessed in small ways. But the truth is this: normal was something I performed, like a role in a play. The real script was written in the sacrifices I made that no one noticed. I left a career in accounting because Ethan's asthma as a toddler meant I couldn't manage the hours. I turned down chances to travel because Chloe cried at night if I wasn't home. I told myself I didn't need a life of my own. What I needed was for them to thrive. And for a while, it worked. Mark went to his job at the auto shop every morning, coming home with grease on his hands and fatigue in his eyes. I packed lunches, volunteered at the PTA, cooked dinners with more love than skill. Our house filled with the smells of spaghetti sauce, the sound of Ethan dribbling a basketball in the driveway, Chloe's piano practice echoing from the den. If you asked me then, I would have said we were happy. Not perfect, but happy enough. Yet sacrifice is a tricky thing. At first, it feels noble, like you're carrying your family on your shoulders. But year after year, the weight grows. And one day you look down and realize your shoulders are trembling, your knees are buckling, and the family you've carried doesn't even notice. They just keep asking for more. When Ethan turned 16, he wanted a car. We didn't have the money, but I took on extra bookkeeping jobs at night. He drove that second-hand Honda to every practice and party, never knowing I fell asleep at my desk balancing someone else's ledgers. When Chloe begged for a summer camp in Vermont, I said yes, even though it meant putting off repairing our leaky roof. Mark shook his head at my choices, but I waved him off. They're only young once, I told him. We can make do. That became my mantra. We can make do. We made do with clothes I never bought for myself, with vacations that never happened, with a marriage that grew quieter each year. And maybe, if all that sacrifice had bought me their gratitude or their happiness, it would have been worth it. But that's not how it works, is it? Children don't keep ledgers. They don't tally what you've given up. They only see what you have left to give. I sometimes think back to the day I married Mark. I was 22, wearing a dress that my mother had sewn on her old Singer machine. I believed that love meant building a home, raising children, standing by each other through thick and thin. What I didn't understand was that in the middle of that story, I would disappear. 52, that's where you find me now. My reflection shows lines carved deep around my mouth, grooves from years of clenching my jaw against worry. My hands are calloused from scrubbing, cooking, folding, counting, working, and my heart is worn, like an old quilt that has been patched too many times, threadbare at the edges. This is not the life I imagined when I first held Ethan in my arms, his tiny lungs fighting for air, or when I stroked Chloe's hair as she fell asleep on my chest. I thought motherhood was a promise, a straight road toward joy. But now I see it as more like a labyrinth, every turn filled with choices that feel right at the time, but lead you deeper into a maze of regrets. The hardest part is admitting that my sacrifices did not save my children. If anything, they taught them to expect more than I could give, to demand even when I had nothing left. And so, the very love I poured out for them has become the river that carried us away from one another. I tell you all this because I need to, because a story untold rots inside you, and mine has been festering for years. I am not looking for pity, nor absolution. What I want is for someone, anyone, to understand that mothers are not saints, not martyrs carved in stone. We are flesh and blood. We break, we bleed. And sometimes we give so much of ourselves that there is nothing left but a hollow shell smiling for family photos. If you had walked past my house last spring, you would have seen me in the garden, knees in the dirt, planting tulips by the mailbox. You would have smiled at the picture, a middle-aged woman tending her flowers. But what you wouldn't see is that I planted them to fill the silence. Mark and I barely spoke. Ethan had stopped coming home for dinner. Chloe stayed in her room, her headphones on, her door closed. The tulips were the only things still listening. It is from that silence, from those tulips, from the hollow ache of years of sacrifice that this story begins. I am Linda Parker, 52 years old. I am a mother, I am a wife, and I am a woman who traded herself away for her family. This confession is the first step to telling the truth, because if I don't tell it, the lies will go on forever. And if you're willing to listen, maybe, just maybe, you'll understand how love can save you and how it can ruin you all at once. The house we lived in was nothing extraordinary from the outside. Beige siding, dark green shutters, a porch swing that creaked with every gust of wind. To the neighbors on Maplewood Drive, it was simply another suburban home with trimmed hedges and a tidy lawn. But inside those walls lived more secrets than any family should carry. Our dining room table had 6 chairs, though we only needed 4. The extra 2 stayed tucked in the corners like silent witnesses. I used to imagine them filled during holidays, Mark's brother visiting from Chicago, my sister bringing her loud, laughing children. But as the years passed, those chairs gathered dust. We sat in our designated places, Mark at the head, me at the other end, Ethan on the left, Chloe on the right. 4 people who once leaned in close over spaghetti dinners now sat like strangers, each staring at their plates. Mark had grown quieter over the years. He worked long hours at the shop, fixing transmissions, brakes, anything with gears and grease. When he came home, he smelled of oil and exhaustion. He'd wash his hands, eat quickly, and disappear to the recliner with the evening news humming in the background. There was a time he used to tell me about the customers he met, the co-workers he laughed with. Lately, though, his words had dwindled to shrugs and sighs. Ethan, our firstborn, was 26 and restless. He carried ambition like a badge, but it was never enough to steady him. He tried college for a year, dropped out, worked sales for a while, then chased investment schemes that promised quick returns. His energy filled the house, but it was an energy that left chaos in its wake. When he spoke, it was fast, insistent, always pointing toward the next big thing. He saw the world as an opportunity, but also as an enemy that hadn't given him what he deserved. Chloe was 22, gentle as rain but sharp in ways that surprised me. She loved books more than people, music more than conversation. She filled notebooks with sketches and half-written poems, each one tucked beneath her bed as though the world wasn't ready for them. I sometimes thought she had inherited my silence, the way I swallowed my needs to make room for others. But unlike me, her silence carried resistance. She wasn't trying to please, she was protecting herself. The truth about our house was that it wasn't a home anymore. It was a holding place for disappointments we didn't talk about. The walls carried echoes of arguments. The air was thick with things unsaid. And every night I would stand at the sink, washing dishes, wondering when exactly we had shifted from a family to a collection of separate lives. One evening, I overheard Ethan in the garage. His voice rose and fell like waves crashing against rocks. "You don't get it, Dad. This is how people make real money now. You invest, you take risks, you win big. I'm not going to spend my life like you, covered in grease, counting pennies." I froze in the kitchen doorway, my hands still wet from the dishwater. Mark's reply was low, firm. "Money doesn't come easy, son. You've got to earn it, and not by cutting corners. Dreams don't pay bills." Silence followed, thick and dangerous. I waited for Ethan to storm back inside, but instead, the sound of a slammed toolbox echoed through the garage. When he finally came in, he brushed past me without a word, his face a mask of anger and shame. Later, as I folded laundry in Chloe's room, she whispered, "They've been fighting a lot, Mom. Ethan says you'll understand. He says you'll help him." Her words sat heavy in my chest. Of course he thought I'd help him. I always had. I was the buffer, the bridge, the one who smoothed over conflicts with soft words and quiet sacrifices. But standing in that dimly lit room, holding one of Chloe's worn sweaters, I realized how much that role had cost me. Secrets were piling up in our house. Ethan's debts, Mark's silence, Chloe's hidden writings, and I was expected to carry them all. One Saturday morning, I found a letter tucked beneath a stack of Ethan's unopened mail. It wasn't addressed to me, but curiosity, or maybe fear, made me open it. The words blurred as I read, "Final notice. Payment past due. Immediate action required." I folded the letter quickly, sliding it back where I found it. My heart thudded in my ears. Ethan hadn't told us, or maybe he had told himself he could fix it before we found out. But now I knew, and knowing meant I was already carrying the secret for him. That evening, when Chloe returned from the library, she found me sitting at the kitchen table staring at that pile of mail. "Mom," she said softly, "what's wrong?" Her eyes searched mine, patient but insistent. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Nothing, sweetheart, just tired." But she saw through me, she always did. She placed her hand on mine, her skin warm, her grip steady. "You don't have to fix everything," she whispered. The words pierced me because they weren't just Chloe's. They were the words I had never allowed myself to say out loud. Later that night, as I lay awake beside Mark's steady breathing, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how long I could keep holding it all together. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was silence built on secrets, and secrets are heavier than any mortgage or bill. I felt them pressing down on me, each one demanding to be kept, each one pulling me further from the woman I once was. It struck me then that our home had become like those empty chairs at the dining table. Present, but unused, full of potential, but gathering dust. We were a family still, but only in form. In truth, we were four people drifting apart, each with secrets too fragile to be spoken. And in the center of it all was me, the mother who had built her life on carrying everyone else's weight, even as it threatened to bury her. It began on a Thursday night, the kind of night that smelled like rain though the sky stayed stubbornly clear. I had just finished clearing the dinner plates, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Ethan's childhood favorite, when he lingered at the table after everyone else had drifted away. His fork tapped against his plate, a staccato rhythm that set my nerves on edge. "Mom," he said finally, his voice too casual to be casual at all, "I need a favor." I set the dish towel down, wiping my damp hands on my jeans. "What kind of favor?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his brown eyes gleaming with a mix of charm and desperation I had seen too many times. "It's just paperwork, a signature, nothing complicated. I'm working on a new investment deal and the bank wants a co-signer. If you put your name down, I can get the loan. Easy." The word loan landed like a stone in my stomach. Images of that overdue notice I had found flashed through my mind. I tried to steady my voice. "Ethan, how much are we talking about?" "Only 20,000, he replied quickly, as if speed could soften the number. "It's nothing, really. I'll double it in 6 months, triple it maybe." "20,000 isn't nothing," I said, more sharply than I intended. His jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, he looked like the boy who once clutched his inhaler during soccer practice, eyes wide with fear. But the look vanished, replaced by a man's defiance. "Dad won't understand," he pressed. "He's stuck in the Stone Age. He thinks the only way to make money is to break your back in a garage. Though, you get it. You've always believed in me." Those words were daggers wrapped in silk. "You've always believed in me." It was true. I had. I was the one who stayed up to sew his costumes for school plays, the one who scraped together gas money for his first job, the one who told him failure was just a stepping stone. But this wasn't a stepping stone. It was a cliff. "Ethan," I whispered, "you're asking me to put our family at risk. That's not belief, that's gambling." His chair screeched against the hardwood as he stood. "You don't trust me? After everything I've tried to build." His voice rose, sharp enough to make Chloe poke her head out of her room. She lingered in the hallway, clutching a book to her chest, her eyes wide. "Maybe you should lower your voice," I said softly. But Ethan was already pacing, running his hands through his hair, his anger spilling over. "All my life, you've said you'd do anything for us. You gave up your job, your dreams. You brag about your sacrifices, Mom. But when I need you most, when I finally have a shot, you slam the door in my face." I wanted to tell him it wasn't true, that I would do anything for him, but the words caught in my throat. Because maybe, just maybe, it was true. I had spent decades giving, and I had nothing left to give. My silence must have looked like betrayal. Chloe stepped forward then, her voice trembling but clear. "Ethan, stop. Mom's done enough. Can't you see she's tired?" The bravery in her words startled me. Ethan turned on her, his face twisted with rage. "You don't get it either, Chloe. You live in your books and your music. You think the world is soft. It's not. If Mom doesn't help me, we're finished. All of us." "Don't drag me into your failures," she shot back, her cheeks flushing red. It was the first time I had heard her speak to him like that. The first time the siblings stood on opposite sides of a battlefield. Mark appeared in the doorway then, drawn by the noise. His eyes darted from Ethan's clenched fists to Chloe's trembling frame, then to me. He didn't speak, just crossed his arms and waited. His silence was worse than shouting. I finally found my voice. "Ethan," I said, forcing calm into my words, "I can't sign. I love you, but I can't." The room went still. My refusal hung in the air like smoke after a fire. His face hardened into something I didn't recognize. He grabbed his jacket, stormed past us, and slammed the front door so hard the windows rattled. The sound echoed through the house long after his footsteps faded. Chloe sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Mark exhaled slowly, shaking his head, and retreated without a word. And me? I stood frozen at the sink, staring at the streaks of water on the counter, wondering when exactly love had turned into debt and sacrifice had turned into betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt like Ethan returning, every gust of wind a reminder of the storm I had unleashed. I replayed the argument over and over, searching for a different ending, a gentler refusal, some way to give him hope without giving away everything. But there was none. A crack had opened in our family, and though it was small now, I could feel it widening, threatening to split us apart. I thought of the tulips by the mailbox, their green stems pushing stubbornly through the soil. I had planted them to bring beauty, but even they couldn't hide the fractures beneath the surface. Secrets had filled our home, and now the cracks were showing. And in the quiet of that sleepless night, I understood something I had never dared admit before. Sometimes love doesn't mend what's broken. Sometimes it breaks you first. Sleep would not come to me after that night. I lay in the dark listening to Mark's even breathing, Chloe's muffled sobs from down the hall, and the distant echo of Ethan's anger in the slam of the door. The house felt heavier, as though the weight of all our secrets had finally cracked the beams and settled onto my chest. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a different life, but the only thing that came to me was my mother's face. Her name was Margaret, though everyone called her Maggie. She was a strong woman, not in the way of muscles or bold words, but in the way of carrying too much without ever setting it down. I can still see her hands, calloused from sewing, cooking, cleaning. She had 4 children, and I was the youngest. My father was a kind man, but absent in the ways that mattered. He worked long shifts at the mill, came home tired, and left Maggie to shoulder the rest. I remember one evening when I was 10, watching her at the kitchen table as she opened a stack of bills. She rubbed her temples, her lips moving silently as though praying over numbers she could not change. I asked her if everything was all right. She smiled at me then, a tired smile that hid more than it showed, and said, "Don't you worry, Linda. Mamas are made to carry the heavy things so their children don't have to." That sentence burrowed into me like a seed, and for years I believed it was true. It became my unspoken creed when I married Mark at 22, when Ethan was born with his tiny lungs wheezing, when Chloe's colic kept me up for months on end. I carried the heavy things because I thought that was what mothers did. But lying in bed now, at 52, I wondered if my mother had ever regretted those words. Did she ever wish someone had told her it was all right to set the heavy things down? Did she ever resent us for not seeing how bent her back had become from the load? The next morning, I found myself in the attic, drawn there like a pilgrim searching for relics. The air was dusty, thick with the smell of cedar and thyme. I opened an old trunk and pulled out a shoebox filled with photographs. There was my mother in her apron, smiling faintly beside a Christmas tree we could barely afford to decorate. There she was at my high school graduation, her hair streaked with gray before its time, clapping proudly, though I could see the fatigue in her eyes. I held the photos in my lap, tracing her face with my fingers, and it struck me that I had become her in ways I never intended. Different house, different decade, same shadow. I had repeated the cycle without even knowing it. That afternoon, Chloe came up to find me. She sat beside me on the attic floor, dust motes dancing in the shaft of sunlight between us. "Is that Grandma?" she asked, pointing to the photograph in my hand. "Yes," I said softly. "She was a good woman. She gave everything she had to us." Chloe studied the photo for a long time. "She looks tired." I smiled sadly. "She was. Is that what happens to all mothers?" she asked. Her voice was hesitant, almost afraid of the answer. I swallowed hard. "It doesn't have to, but sometimes, yes. Sometimes love makes you give up pieces of yourself until there's nothing left." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I don't want that for you or for me." Her words startled me. I had always imagined Chloe would follow my path, the safe, sacrificial road. But in her eyes I saw something different, a warning, a plea not to pass the burden forward. That night, when Ethan didn't come home again, I cooked dinner anyway. Mark sat at the table, silent as usual, eating mechanically. Chloe excused herself early, retreating to her room with her books. I lingered in the kitchen afterward, staring at the empty chair where Ethan should have been. It reminded me of my mother's table, her own children grown and scattered, her sacrifices invisible in the end. I thought then of a story she once told me when I hadn't remembered in years. She said when she was a girl, she dreamed of becoming a nurse. She wanted to travel, to see cities, to help people. But then she married my father, had children, and that dream slipped away like a tide pulling back from shore. She never spoke of it again, except that once. I think she told me as a warning, but I hadn't heard it that way. I had heard it as a lesson. Dreams are things you give up when you become a mother. Now I wondered if I had misunderstood her all along. When I crawled into bed that night, Mark stirred beside me. For the first time in weeks, he spoke more than a sentence. "Ethan's trouble," he murmured. "I know," I said. "You shouldn't carry it alone," he added. His hand brushed mine briefly, then withdrew. I wanted to hold on to it, to ask him to share the weight with me, but the moment slipped away. I stared at the ceiling, the shadow of my mother's words pressing down. Mamas are made to carry the heavy things, but maybe the truth was that the heavy things were never meant to be carried by one person at all. Maybe that's why we break. The house was quiet again, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. It was the quiet of cracks spreading through wood, the silence before a beam snaps. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the shadow of sacrifice was not just my mother's legacy. It was the storm gathering above my own family. The first crack had been Ethan's demand, but the real break came a week later, on a gray Monday morning when Mark found the envelope I had hidden. I had slipped the overdue notice back into Ethan's stack of mail, praying he would handle it before Mark saw. But fate has a way of uncovering what we try so hard to bury. Mark came into the kitchen, holding the envelope in his grease-stained hands, his face tight, his jaw working like he was grinding his teeth from the inside out. "Linda," he said, his voice low but dangerous, "what is this?" I looked at the envelope as though I had never seen it before, though my heart was already racing. "Where did you get that?" "It was on the counter," he snapped. "Past due. Immediate action required. Whose name is on this loan?" I swallowed hard. "Ethan's." The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Mark set the letter on the table, flattening it with his palm as if pinning down the truth. "And when were you going to tell me?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came. The truth that I had known for days, that I had tried to protect Ethan, sat like a stone in my throat. "You knew," Mark said, answering for me. His voice cracked, not with rage, but with something colder, betrayal. "You knew, and you hid it from me." I was trying to give him time, I whispered. "I thought maybe he'd figure it out." "Figure it out?" Mark's fist struck the table, rattling the salt shaker. "He's drowning, Linda. He's dragging us all under, and you hand him the rope." Chloe emerged from her room then, drawn by the sound. She stood barefoot in the doorway, her hair tangled, her eyes wide. "What's happening?" "Ask your mother," Mark said bitterly. "She seems to know more about this family than anyone else." I felt the heat of shame rise in my cheeks. Chloe looked at me, confused, searching my face for the truth I didn't want to say. "It's just money trouble," I managed. "Ethan borrowed more than he could handle." "Borrowed?" Mark barked out a humorless laugh. "That's a polite word for lying, for stealing from our future." Chloe's lips parted as if to speak, but then she closed them again, hugging herself as though to ward off the cold truth settling in the room. Mark turned on me. "Do you know how many nights I've worked late? How many weekends I've stayed at that shop so this family could survive? And you," his voice caught, he shook his head. "You hid this from me. You chose him over us." The words cut deeper than any scream. "You chose him over us." Wasn't that what I'd always done? Sacrificed for Ethan, smoothed his failures, carried his weight until my back bent beneath it? I wanted to tell Mark it wasn't about choosing, it was about saving, but the look in his eyes told me he would not understand. The front door slammed a few minutes later. Mark had left for work without finishing his coffee, his boots tracking oil and dirt across the kitchen floor. I stared at the footprints, feeling like they marked the trail of a man walking away from me. Chloe sat down at the table, staring at the envelope her father had left behind. "Why didn't you tell him, Mom?" she asked softly. I reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. The distance hurt more than Mark's anger. "I didn't want to make things worse," I said, my voice breaking. "But you did," she whispered. And in that moment, I saw not the girl who clung to me for comfort, but a young woman measuring me with eyes too wise for her age. That evening, Ethan finally came home, breezing through the door with the swagger of someone who hadn't left wreckage behind him. "Hey," he said, tossing his jacket over a chair. "What's for dinner?" The absurdity of the question nearly broke me. Mark wasn't home yet, Chloe was silent upstairs, and I stood in the kitchen holding a wooden spoon like it was the only thing keeping me upright. "Dinner," I repeated. "Do you think that's what matters right now?" Ethan frowned. "What's your problem?" I slammed the spoon down on the counter. "My problem is that your father found the notice. He knows about the loan, he knows everything." For a moment, Ethan's bravado faltered. Then he crossed his arms, his chin jutting out defiantly. So what? It's my business. It's not just your business, I snapped. When you can't pay, it becomes ours, your father's, mine, Chloe's. This family is not your safety net. His eyes blazed. You're supposed to believe in me, you're supposed to back me up. I have backed you, I said, my voice shaking. For years. I've carried you when you should have walked on your own. But this I can't carry. He stared at me then, as if seeing me for the first time not as his protector, but as his obstacle, and the look chilled me to the bone. When Mark returned later that night, he barely spoke. He ate in silence, his eyes fixed on the plate, his shoulders tense. Chloe picked at her food, her gaze darting between us. The air was thick with everything unsaid. Afterward, as I washed the dishes alone, I caught sight of my reflection in the kitchen window. A tired woman, lines carved deep around her mouth, eyes hollow with secrets. My mother's face staring back at me. And I knew then, the trust we had built over decades was splintering. Not just between Mark and me, but between all of us. The first crack had spread. The weight of sacrifice had shifted into the weight of betrayal. And once trust breaks, no amount of silence can glue it back together. It was a Friday night, cool and restless, the kind of evening when the air feels charged with something unseen. The rain that had threatened all week finally came, tapping at the windows, drumming steady on the roof. The sound filled the silence of our fractured home like a metronome, counting down to something none of us could name. Ethan came home late, his hair damp, his sneakers muddy, his eyes wild with a restless energy I hadn't seen in years. He dropped his keys on the counter with a metallic clang and poured himself a glass of water as if he owned the place. Mark barely looked up from his recliner, but his jaw tightened. Chloe sat at the table, her sketchbook open, though she wasn't drawing. She watched Ethan with the wary attention of someone bracing for impact. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice sharp, "we need to talk about the loan." Mark set down his beer bottle. "There's nothing to talk about. You borrowed money you can't repay. That's your mess, not mine." "It's not just mine." Ethan's voice cracked like a whip. "I'm your son, that means we're in this together." Mark rose from his chair, slow but deliberate. "Being my son doesn't mean you get to bankrupt this family. You want to live like a man, then face the consequences like one." Ethan's fist clenched around the glass. For a moment, I thought he might throw it. Chloe flinched, her pencil snapping in her hand. "Stop it," she said quietly. "Both of you, please." But neither of them heard her. "You think you're better than me?" Ethan spat, turning on his sister now. "With your books and your perfect grades, hiding up in your room while I'm out here trying to make something of myself." Chloe's face flushed. "Make something? You're drowning in debt, Ethan. You've dragged Mom into it, and now Dad. You don't build a life by lying and begging." His eyes darkened. "At least I'm not wasting mine scribbling poems no one will ever read." The cruelty of it hung in the air. Chloe's shoulders stiffened, but her voice didn't waver. "I'd rather write words that matter to me than live a lie that ruins everyone else." The room vibrated with the storm outside, the thunder rolling as if the sky itself were taking sides. I stood frozen between them, my heart pounding. It felt like history repeating itself, like echoes of my own childhood arguments with siblings over money, over love, over who was chosen and who was left behind. "Enough!" Mark roared, slamming his hand against the wall. The sound silenced us all. He pointed at Ethan. "You leave this house tonight. You come back when you have a plan, not excuses." Ethan's face twisted with rage and hurt. "Throw me out, that's your solution? Fine." He grabbed his jacket and turned to me. "You too, Mom. You let him treat me like this. After everything, you're supposed to be on my side." I wanted to reach for him, to say something, anything that would soften the fury in his eyes, but the words caught in my throat. "You're all the same," he hissed. "None of you ever believed in me." And with that, he stormed out into the rain, the door slamming so hard the walls shook. Chloe's tears spilled over as she whispered, "He's going to destroy himself." Mark sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples. Maybe that's the only way he'll learn. I stood at the window, watching Ethan's figure disappear into the storm. My heart felt split down the middle, torn between the son who had betrayed us and the mother who still longed to save him. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the empty street, and I thought of the night long ago when my own brother vanished after a fight. This was our family's Richard night, the night when love turned into battle, when words became weapons, when the storm outside could not compare to the one raging within our walls. And deep inside, I feared it was the night from which we might never recover. The rain didn't stop that night. It hammered against the roof, seeped into the gutters, and carried Ethan away into the darkness. I stayed by the window long after the headlights of his car had vanished, my breath fogging the glass, my fingers pressed against the pane as if I could pull him back. But the only thing I touched was the cold. Mark had fallen silent, retreating into the recliner with the weight of a man who had said more than he meant, but less than he felt. Chloe had slipped upstairs, her door closing softly, as though she was afraid even sound itself might break the fragile walls holding us together. That left me in the kitchen, alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of the storm. I pulled out the mop and cleaned the muddy footprints Ethan had left across the floor. Each streak felt like a scar. I told myself it was just dirt, that it would come off with soap and water, but the truth was it had already settled deeper. The house no longer smelled like dinner. It smelled like anger and rain. By midnight, when I finally sat down, exhaustion crept over me like a heavy blanket. My back ached, my head throbbed, and my chest carried that familiar weight of holding too much for too long. I thought of my mother again, her tired smile, her bent shoulders, and realized I was becoming her shadow more each day. The next morning, Mark left early for work without saying goodbye. His absence at breakfast felt like punishment, though he didn't have to say the words. Chloe shuffled into the kitchen, her eyes swollen from crying, clutching her sketchbook like a shield. She sat at the table, silent. I made her toast, buttered it the way she liked, but she pushed the plate away. "I don't have an appetite," she whispered. I reached across the table, touching her hand. "He'll come back, Chloe." Her eyes met mine, sharp with a quiet anger I hadn't seen before. "That's the problem. He'll come back and you'll forgive him and this will all happen again." The truth of her words cut deep. I wanted to argue, to defend Ethan, to defend myself, but I couldn't. She was right. Forgiveness had become my reflex, my way of patching holes so the house wouldn't collapse, yet every patch only made the cracks spread further. That afternoon, I went to the market. As I walked through the aisles, I picked up Ethan's favorite cereal out of habit. I stood there holding the box, realizing he might not eat at our table again, at least not soon. Still, I put it in the cart. Sacrifice has a way of becoming routine. You give, even when you know it won't be noticed. When I got home, the house felt emptier than ever. I busied myself with laundry, scrubbing at Ethan's shirts though he wasn't there to wear them. One shirt had a small blood stain near the collar, maybe from a nosebleed, maybe from a careless cut at work. I soaked it in cold water, rubbed the stain with soap until my knuckles turned raw. It seemed important, somehow to erase every mark, as though cleansing the fabric could cleanse the memory of last night's fight. By evening, Chloe came into the laundry room. She watched me scrubbing, her eyes filling with tears. "Mom," she said softly, "you don't have to keep cleaning up after him." I looked at her, the water dripping from my hands, the soap bubbles clinging to my wrists. "I know," I said, "but I don't know how to stop." She wrapped her arms around me then, and I realized how thin I had become under her embrace, how my bones pressed through my skin. Sacrifice had hollowed me out. I was still standing, still functioning, but inside I was collapsing. That night, I wrote a note to Ethan. I didn't know where he was, but I needed to believe he might read it someday. I wrote, "My son, I don't have much left to give, but I still love you. Please don't confuse love with silence or sacrifice with approval. I am tired, Ethan, tired in ways you can't see, but even in my exhaustion, I am still your mother. Come home, not for money, not for forgiveness, but because I can't carry this family alone anymore. I folded the note and placed it in the drawer by the front door. Maybe he would never see it. Maybe it was just for me. A confession, a release. When I finally lay down to sleep, my body trembled with fatigue, but my mind remained restless. I knew the price of sacrifice now. It wasn't just sleepless nights or empty pockets. It was watching the people you love become strangers while you disappear into the background, unnoticed. And yet, as much as I wanted to set the heavy things down, I couldn't, because if I did, what would be left of us? The storm outside had passed, but inside me, the rain had only just begun. The storm cleared by morning, leaving the world washed and strangely quiet. Puddles glistened in the driveway, the maple tree dripped steady as though wringing itself dry. Inside, the silence felt heavier than the rain had been. Mark left early again, his truck grumbling down the street before the sun was fully up. I made coffee for one, then poured it down the sink when I realized I had no appetite for it. Chloe joined me at the table, her hair tied up messily, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. She didn't look at me at first. Instead, she opened her sketchbook and began shading a drawing with deliberate strokes. Only when she closed it with a snap did she lift her gaze. "Mom," she said, her voice steady but carrying a tremor beneath it, "we can't live like this anymore." I frowned, unsure what she meant. Like what? Waiting for Ethan to come back and tear us apart again. Watching Dad walk out every morning like the house is a prison. Watching you, her voice cracked. Watching you kill yourself trying to hold it all together. I tried to smile to brush it off. "I'm fine, sweetheart, I've handled worse." "No," she said sharply, surprising me. "You're not fine. I see you, Mom. You don't eat. You don't sleep. You clean and scrub like you're trying to erase us from existence. That's not living. That's disappearing." Her words landed like stones in my chest. I opened my mouth to argue, but she pushed ahead. "I've been thinking," she said carefully. "We could leave, you and me. We don't have to stay here waiting for them to change. We could find an apartment in town, small but ours. You could do bookkeeping again. I could get a part-time job at the library. We could start over." The suggestion hung in the air, fragile and bold. I stared at her, my daughter with her earnest eyes and trembling hands, and I felt both pride and terror. "Leave," I repeated as though the word itself were foreign. "This is our home." "Is it?" she asked softly. "Or is it just the place where we keep falling apart?" I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to steady myself. The thought of leaving felt like betrayal. For 30 years, I had told myself my duty was to stay, to hold the walls together, even if it meant losing myself inside them. Walking away felt like failure, like dropping the heavy things my mother had warned me never to set down. But looking at Chloe, I wondered if maybe setting them down was the only way to keep from breaking completely. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I don't want your life. I don't want to watch you sacrifice until there's nothing left. I want a chance to be happy, and I want you to have that too." Her grip was firm, her eyes fierce. For a moment, I imagined it, a small apartment with peeling paint but laughter in the rooms. Dinner for two without tension simmering beneath every word. Nights free from the sound of slammed doors. A life that belonged to us, not the ghosts of what we had tried to hold together. But then another image came, Ethan stumbling back, soaked and desperate, looking for the mother who had always saved him. Mark sitting alone in this house, bitter but broken without us. Could I abandon them even after everything? "I can't," I whispered. "Not yet." Chloe's face fell, but she didn't argue. She pulled her hand back slowly, as though releasing something fragile that she feared might shatter. "I thought you'd say that," she murmured. She stood and carried her sketchbook upstairs, leaving me with the cold coffee and the echo of her words. All day the idea haunted me. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper it. The empty chair at the table. The laundry basket filled with Ethan's shirts. The recliner where Mark sat like a ghost of himself. We could leave. That night, when the house was finally quiet, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The weight of sacrifice pressed down as always, but now there was something else. The outline of a door, barely visible, leading somewhere beyond this life. I wasn't brave enough to open it yet, but for the first time, I knew it existed. 3 nights passed with no word from Ethan. Each day, I half expected to hear his shoes stomping through the door, his voice demanding something, his anger filling the house again. But the silence stretched longer, heavier, until even Chloe stopped asking where he was. On the 4th night, he returned. The door burst open near midnight, startling me awake from the couch where I dozed off with a blanket around my shoulders. His clothes were damp, his hair plastered to his forehead, and his eyes glittered with a feverish light that made my stomach twist. "Mom," he said, his voice slurred with exhaustion or maybe drink. "I figured it out. I just need a little more time, a little more money. We can fix this." Before I could respond, Mark appeared in the hallway, his face hard. "You're not dragging us down again, Ethan, not tonight." Ethan dropped his duffel bag on the floor with a thud. "Why do you hate me so much?" He spat. "Why is it always me against all of you?" "You made it that way," Mark shot back. "You think the world owes you, and when it doesn't, you turn to your mother to clean up the mess. Enough." Chloe had come to the top of the stairs, her arms crossed tightly. "He's right, Ethan," she said quietly. "You can't keep doing this." Something snapped in him then. He lunged toward the stairs, pointing at her with shaking hands. "Shut up, Chloe. You've always looked down on me. You think you're better with your books, your stupid drawings. You don't know what it's like to be the one who has to prove himself." Chloe's face went pale, but she didn't step back. "You don't have to prove yourself by destroying everyone else." I moved between them, my hands raised. "Stop it, both of you." My voice shook. But Ethan's rage had gathered momentum like a storm rolling downhill. Mark stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Go to your room, Chloe." "No," Chloe said firmly. "I'm not hiding anymore." The air in the house was electric, heavy with thunder even though the skies outside were clear. Ethan shoved past me, charging up the stairs. Chloe stood her ground, but I saw fear flicker in her eyes. At the top step, he grabbed her sketchbook and hurled it down the staircase. Pages fluttered everywhere, drawings of trees and faces and half-finished poems scattering like broken glass. "Stop!" I cried, but the sound barely reached him. He shoved Chloe back against the wall. It happened so fast. Her foot slipped on a page, and suddenly she was teetering on the edge of the staircase. For one frozen heartbeat, I saw my daughter's arms flail, her eyes wide with terror, the same look Richard must have had in that other family's story. "Chloe!" I screamed, reaching for her. Mark lunged too, grabbing her just as she lost balance. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing, while Ethan stood there, his chest heaving, his face crumbling with something between fury and regret. I pushed past them, scooping up Chloe's scattered sketches, my hands shaking so badly I tore the pages. "This has to stop," I whispered, "before it kills us." Ethan stared at me, his voice hollow. I didn't mean to, but I couldn't listen, not anymore. His words were always "I didn't mean to." His whole life was an accident waiting to happen, and now it had almost taken my daughter from me. Mark's voice thundered through the hall. "Get out, Ethan, now, before I call the police." Ethan's eyes darted from his father to me, pleading, but I had no strength left. I turned away, and in that moment something broke, not just in him, but in me too. He grabbed his bag and stormed out again, slamming the door so hard the glass in the window rattled. The silence that followed was louder than the fight itself. Chloe clung to me, her tears soaking my shoulder. "He's going to kill us one day," she whispered. I held her close, my heart pounding, my body trembling. She was wrong in one sense, he hadn't killed us. Not yet. But I could feel it now, like a shadow hovering just outside our home. We were balanced on a cliff edge, one slip away from falling. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that the next time we might not catch ourselves in time. The house never recovered from that night. Even after Chloe was safe in her room and Ethan had disappeared into the dark again, the air carried the echo of her scream on the staircase. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. Every slam of a door, real or imagined, made my chest tighten. I tried to keep going, as I always had. I folded laundry. I cooked meals no one touched. I went to work at the small bookkeeping job I had taken on part-time, but my body betrayed me. The headaches came first, sharp bursts behind my eyes that blurred the numbers on the page. Then the chest pains, squeezing tight as if invisible hands were wringing me dry. One morning, while pouring Chloe's coffee before school, the mug slipped from my hand. It shattered on the floor, hot liquid splashing my bare feet. I reached for the counter to steady myself, but the room spun, and then there was only black. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. The sterile light hummed above me, the sheets stiff and tucked too tightly around my legs. Chloe sat in a chair by the window, her sketchbook open but untouched. She looked up the moment she saw me stir. "Mom," she whispered, rushing to my side. Her eyes were red from crying. "You scared me." I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, I didn't mean to." "You don't have to mean to," she said, her voice breaking. "Just happens. You've given and given until there's nothing left. Look at you." Her words pierced me, not with anger but with grief. She was right. My body had carried the weight of sacrifice too long, and now it was crumbling under it. Mark came in then, his face drawn with worry. He stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed as though unsure if he belonged there. For a long time, none of us spoke. Then he cleared his throat. "The doctor says it was exhaustion," he muttered. "Stress. Your blood pressure's too high." I nodded weakly. "I know." He shifted uncomfortably. "I should have seen it, should have helped more." His voice cracked, the words strangled by years of silence. For the first time in weeks, I reached for his hand. He let me take it. "We both should have seen it," I said softly. "But we can't change what we didn't see. We can only decide what to do now." Chloe leaned forward, her voice trembling with urgency. "Then let's leave, Mom. You and me, please, before it's too late." I looked at her, at the desperation in her eyes, and my heart broke. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to imagine a life free of slammed doors and broken promises. But even now, lying in that bed, I couldn't stop thinking of Ethan, of the boy gasping for air in my arms, clutching his inhaler, trusting me to keep him alive. "I can't leave him," I whispered. Chloe shook her head. "He'll destroy you." "Maybe," I said, my voice thin as paper. "But he's still my son. A mother doesn't stop loving, even when it hurts." Tears filled her eyes. "And what about me? Don't I matter?" The question hit me like a knife. I reached for her hand, squeezing with what little strength I had left. "You matter more than you know. Everything I've done has been for both of you. But maybe I forgot to show it." She laid her forehead against my hand, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. In that moment, I realized the final sacrifice wasn't about giving Ethan another chance. It was about giving Chloe the truth. That love is flawed, that sacrifice is imperfect, but that she was never less than the center of my world. When the nurse came to check my vitals, I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not for myself, but for my children. For Ethan to find a path that didn't end in destruction. For Chloe to find a life where she didn't confuse sacrifice with love. And for me, I prayed simply for enough strength to hold on a little longer, until I could pass the weight to hands younger, steadier, unburdened by the shadows of the past. The monitor beeped steadily beside me, a rhythm both fragile and stubborn. And I thought, this is the price of a mother's love. Not the meals or the money or the sleepless nights. The price is yourself. and I had finally paid it in full. When they discharged me from the hospital, the autumn leaves had begun to fall. The maple tree in our front yard blazed orange and red, its branches shedding the past in silent surrender. I stepped out of the car slowly, Chloe's arm steadying me, and felt the cool air fill my lungs. It tasted different, like something ending, but also something beginning. Mark carried my bag inside, but the distance between us remained. He moved through the rooms like a man walking through ruins, careful not to disturb what had already collapsed. I realized then that our marriage was like the house itself, still standing, but hollowed by years of silence and sacrifice. Ethan did not come home. Days passed into weeks, and the only news of him came in fragments, rumors of unpaid debts, whispers from friends who had seen him at bars, his name mentioned in the kind of conversations people lower their voices for. I tried to call to leave messages, but the phone stayed silent. A mother's love can reach far, but not always far enough. Chloe became my anchor. She brewed tea when the headaches came, sat with me when the nights felt unbearable, and left little sketches by my bedside, drawings of birds breaking free from cages, of women carrying lanterns through the dark. I pinned them to the refrigerator like talismans against despair. One evening, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table that had witnessed our laughter, our arguments, our betrayals. She placed her hand over mine. "Mom," she said softly, "we can't keep waiting for him. We need to live, you and me." Her eyes held no accusation, only quiet resolve. For the first time, I didn't argue, I nodded. And so, little by little, we began again. I took on more bookkeeping clients, not out of sacrifice, but because I wanted to. Chloe applied for a job at the library, and when she got it, she came home glowing, her joy filling the house with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Mark drifted further, eventually moving into the spare room. There were no fights, no ultimatums, just a quiet recognition that sometimes love grows in different directions, and holding on only makes the breaking worse. Life didn't become perfect. The shadows of Ethan's absence lingered, and some nights I woke from dreams of him standing at the foot of the bed, 12 years old again, asking me to fix what was broken. But in the daylight, I learned to breathe without the weight crushing my chest. One Sunday afternoon, Chloe and I walked to the park. The air was crisp, the trees nearly bare, and children laughed on the playground. She slipped her hand into mine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. We sat on a bench, watching the leaves scatter. "It feels different now," she said. "What does?" I asked. "Life," she replied, "like it's ours again." I looked at her, at the young woman she had become, fierce, gentle, unbroken, and I realized she was right. Out of the ashes of our fractured family, something new was taking shape. Not what I had imagined, not what I had sacrificed for, but something honest. I thought then of my mother, of her words about carrying the heavy things. Maybe she was right for her time, but for mine, the lesson had shifted. Perhaps the true strength of a mother wasn't in carrying everything, but in knowing when to set some things down so her children could walk beside her instead of behind her. As the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. I will not vanish into sacrifice. I will live for Chloe, for myself, and in some way even for Ethan, because hope, fragile as it is, still flickers for him. The world moves on, carrying both loss and renewal, and so do we. Author's note to the readers. Thank you for walking with me through Linda's story. It is a story of sacrifice, of broken trust, of storms within families, but also of resilience, love, and the courage to begin again. May it remind you that even in the darkest seasons, there can be light. Even in ashes, there can be rebirth. I wish you health, peace, and the warmth of family. Hold your loved ones close, forgive when you can, and never forget to live for yourself as well. With gratitude, the author.